Okay, welcome, Negronis with Nord, episode number 45. I am alone once again. If you didn't see last week's episode, I was with Dorian and Sophie from our team. We talked about some highs and lows, as someone on our team called it, slay or nay episode of what were some of the best influencer partnerships, what were some of the worst, our kind of favorite moments, our least favorite moments from the year. Really fun episode. If you haven't watched it, you should absolutely do that. But we are back to how things usually are, just me. And well, we're not totally back to usual because I'm still off the sauce and doing not totally dry, but what I've heard called damp January. So I've had maybe 6 drinks this month, which is incredibly low for me. And I am learning to live as a person that isn't going out and having cocktails and having that be part of your life. I did a 1,000-piece puzzle recently. I don't know if I talked about that, but did I talk about the puzzle before?
I think, yeah.
Yeah, I finished that puzzle. It was wildly satisfying and very addictive, actually. I was like up till 1 a.m. a few nights in a row working on it. So we've learned I have an addictive personality. That is like something I've always known, but it applies to puzzles, apparently. I was just in Minnesota, first business trip of the year. And I don't know if you've been to Minnesota in January, but it is lovely. I was actually, Minnesota came through. I was surprised. I had dinner at the Four Seasons. I worked out at Barry's Boot Camp. I had drinks at Restoration Hardware, Rooftop. Minnesota has had quite the glow up. Always nice to be face to face with clients. I'm going to continue to talk about the economy because it doesn't do you any good to ignore it. I'm not fear-mongering. I'm not, trying to create a sense of panic. I think the media is certainly doing that a little bit. I do want you all to take this seriously, and I do worry that enough people have not completely internalized kind of what is happening and how the mood has shifted across the industry. We just saw retail sales numbers for December were not so good. Early holiday spending looked really positive, slowed down in December. Jobs reports was good. So like always, we have some conflicting data. There continues to be a lot of kind of scary, strange stuff happening out there. I will say, in speaking to the client who we were talking to out in Minnesota, this stuff is top of mind for them. One of the leaders after the meeting kind of pulled me aside and said, just thank you for addressing the reality of the situation inside of the company and approaching it with empathy and understanding that, they are going through some difficult times. And while, everyone I talk to still very much believes in influencer marketing and knows that this is going to be a big part of the future of how they communicate with their audiences, that the reality of the next 6 to 12 months is that, things are going to be tough. I'm going to keep saying this because I think as influencers, you have to react. We had a few slides in one of the kind of larger, bigger picture presentations that we did. And we talked about economic headwinds and we said, how is the industry reacting? We talked about how are we reacting? And we talked through a bunch of things that we as Fohr are thinking about. And then we had a slide on how I think influencers should react. And a big part of that is, providing more value, going above and beyond more, making sure this stuff works, taking more ownership. One of the values at Fohr that we talk a lot about is ownership. And we tell our employees that you have to take ownership over your future here, ownership over your work, ownership over your kind of the metrics that you are meant to produce as an employee at Fohr. As influencers, you have to take ownership over that, right? It's not enough to blame poor performance on the algorithm or to phone in a collaboration that you're not as excited about. There are more eyeballs than ever on this work. And let's say last year they spent $500,000 on influencer marketing, and this year they spent $350,000. 15 less partners of the 50 that they worked with the previous year. Are you in the bottom 15? Probably more realistically, because they want to work with new people, they're only going to engage the top 20% is what we generally see get re-engaged. Are you in the top 10? And if you're growing a business, you have to grow that business on the existing clients that you have, retention, growing those accounts, working with people over and over again. That is the path to making serious money. It's not about chasing the next new deal. Once you've established your business a bit and you've got a book of clients that you work with. This is still very much on people's mind. It is still very much a part of the conversation. We will continue talking about it. If you have any economy, like recession questions specifically, please send them in. We're going to keep sharing this stuff with y'all. On another note, I listened to a book this over break. It's called How to Get Rich. It's pretty simple. I think it's like really applicable to anyone who is heading out on their own. And I would suggest it, especially the first half, I think, was really interesting and inspiring. And everyone who starts their own business that, leaves a job to be an influencer full time, that like attaining some level of wealth is probably one of your goals. And so he really specifically talks about that and how to do that. He ended up, I think, being worth about $800 million. I think it's an important thing to remember that if you are seeking large rewards, that risk is inherent to that. And if you look at your life and you are disappointed with where you are and you can't point to risks that you've taken, that's probably a root cause of the problem. And also that it's not for everyone. It's totally fine to be more risk adverse. It's totally fine to not, gamble your entire life and livelihood. But I do believe that if you do not have a clear idea about what your goals are, then there is essentially no way that you're going to achieve it. So it was an interesting book. I thought it was an interesting one to listen to. He was a pretty engaging guy, worth a listen if you are looking for something to consume. So let's get on to a couple of quick questions. So one question was off of some of our 2023 predictions, one of which is that we are going to see budgets a little bit lower in Q1, Q2, and Q3, Q4, they will pick back up. The question is, why do we believe that they'll be higher in Q3, Q4? Is it the platforms will be more developed by then? Is it that companies can make sure things are going well in the beginning so they can confidently invest? Good question. One, Q4 is far and away the kind of biggest investment period of the year. Q3, Q4, both big quarters. Holiday is so important. For some brands, 60, 70, sometimes 80% of their annual sales come in that 4-week period. So a lot of the marketing that you do throughout the year, especially for those kind of more, the consumer goods, the kinds of things that you would buy for the holidays, a lot of what we're doing is softening the ground, getting people used to it, setting us up for conversions at the end of the year and making sure that everyone has a good holiday. It's why that month is so important to set the tone for the next year. And it's also just a reaction to the uncertainty in the economic climate right now, as we've been talking about ad nauseum and on this episode, that is why we think it's going to be down a little bit and it will come back in Q3, Q4, because ultimately I think the stock market is bottoming out. The Fed will stop raising interest rates soon. Hopefully they'll start lowering interest rates, which will make it easier for companies to borrow money, which will make it easier for them to invest in their future growth, which is good for you and me and everyone else. So this morning, and every day we ask a question of the day to the company. We share it in Slack, and today was, what is your celebrity lookalike? And I embarrassingly had to say Ace Ventura, not Jim Carrey, but specifically Ace Ventura, especially when my hair is quite long. So that is my celebrity lookalike. The puzzle was like a map of New York City with a bunch of bunch of the landmarks and stuff. So it was like lots of small details. So a good, difficult, but not like stupidly hard, like one of those dumb gradient puzzles. I would recommend it. It was great. We can put a link up to it. Y'all should do it. It was fun. Not sponsored, yeah. This is just that I used my money to buy a $14 puzzle or whatever it was.